You are standing in a parking lot. Your phone is dead. The blue dot is gone. Panic sets in almost instantly. You don't know which direction is north. You don't know which way leads home. This feeling, this small flare of helplessness, would have been completely alien to your ancestors. They had no satellites, no compasses, no paper maps. And yet they walked hundreds of miles across open desert, dense forest, and featureless ocean, and they came home. Every time. How? The answer isn't luck. It isn't magic. It's a forgotten skill buried so deep in your biology that you still carry the hardware for it, even if you've never switched it on. Start with the ocean, because it's the most impossible case. Picture open water in every direction. No landmarks. No trees. No mountains. Just sky and swell. Now picture a group of Pacific Islanders sailing a wooden canoe across 2,000 miles of that emptiness, and arriving at a speck of an island with pinpoint accuracy. Anthropologist David Lewis spent years studying these navigators. And what he documented reads like science fiction. They read the ocean itself. Swells bounce off distant islands and create interference patterns on the surface. Patterns a trained navigator can feel through the hull of the canoe with their own body. They memorized the rising and setting points of specific stars, using them like a rotating compass across the night sky. They watched the flight patterns of frigate birds, which fly out to sea each morning and return to land each evening. A living arrow pointing toward shore. None of this was written down. It was memorized, chanted, passed from master to apprentice across generations. Encoded into songs so the knowledge would survive. Now go north, to the Arctic, where the ocean freezes and the landmarks disappear under snow. Anthropologist Claudio Laporta documented how Inuit hunters cross vast stretches of sea ice with no visible markers at all. They read snowdrift patterns. Because wind carves the snow into consistent ridges that always point in the same direction relative to the prevailing wind. They noticed the way starlight reflects differently off ice versus open water. Invisible to an untrained eye. They track subtle shifts in wind on their own skin, using their face as a compass. Where you see a blank white void, they see a legible landscape, dense with information. Here's the part that should stop you. None of these navigators were exceptional geniuses. They weren't a rare subset of humanity born with a special gift. They were ordinary people, trained from childhood, using a brain that every single human being still has. That brain has a name for its navigation system, and it was only discovered in 1971. Neuroscientist John O'Keefe found specialized cells deep in the hippocampus that fire only when an animal is in a specific location. He called them place cells. Your brain builds an internal, living map of every space you move through, updating in real time, without you ever consciously trying. Decades later, researchers found grid cells too, which fire in a repeating hexagonal pattern, functioning almost like internal coordinates, a built-in grid laid over the world. This discovery was significant enough to win the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2014. Your skull is carrying a GPS system that evolution spent millions of years perfecting. So why does using a paper map feel so foreign to you now? Because for nearly all of human history, wayfinding wasn't abstract. It was physical, sensory, constant. Ancient humans didn't glance at a symbol and translate it into reality. They read reality directly. The angle of the sun against a specific ridgeline. The direction moss favored on a tree trunk. The smell of a river before it came into view. The subtle temperature drop near a hidden stream. Every walk was an act of building a three-dimensional model of the world. Layered with sound, scent, temperature, and light. All stitched together by that internal hippocampal map running quietly in the background. And that internal map wasn't stored casually. Neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire studied London taxi drivers, who must memorize 25,000 streets to pass a notoriously difficult licensing exam called simply the knowledge. Using brain scans, she found their posterior hippocampus was measurably larger than average, and that the size increased the longer someone drove a cab. Spatial memory isn't a fixed trait you're either born with or without. It's a muscle. Use it constantly, and it visibly grows. Stop using it, and it quietly shrinks. Which brings you to the twist. You are shrinking it. Every single day. Turn-by-turn navigation doesn't just help you get somewhere. It replaces the entire cognitive process your ancestors relied on for survival. Multiple studies on GPS dependency have found that people who rely heavily on turn-by-turn directions perform measurably worse on spatial memory tasks and show reduced hippocampal engagement during navigation, compared to people who navigate using landmarks and their own internal sense of direction. You're not just avoiding the discomfort of getting lost. You're actively declining to exercise the exact brain region ancient humans depended on to find food, water, shelter, and their way back to their children. This isn't a story about how ancient humans were more primitive than you. It's the opposite. They were running a fully powered version of a system you're currently letting go dormant. Their world demanded constant spatial awareness. So the hippocampus stayed engaged. Alert. Sharp. Your world outsources that awareness to a screen. So the same region gets quieter, and quieter, and quieter. Here's where it gets personal. Have you ever walked somewhere without your phone? Guided only by memory. And felt a small flicker of pride when you turned the right corner without checking anything? That flicker is ancient. That is your hippocampus doing exactly the job it evolved to do, the same job it did for a hunter tracking a wounded animal for 6 hours before finding a way straight back to camp before dark. You still have the hardware. You've just been handing the job to someone else. Consider what it actually took to survive as a forager with no written directions of any kind. You had to hold the location of water sources across dry seasons and wet ones. You had to remember which valleys flooded and which stayed safe. You had to track the seasonal movement of animal herds across enormous ranges, then find your way back to camp before nightfall. When a wrong turn could mean not making it back at all. Getting lost wasn't an inconvenience. It was one of the more dangerous things that could happen to you. So the brain that survived to pass on its genes was, by definition, a brain exceptionally good at not getting lost. That pressure shaped you more deeply than most people realize. Children as young as 3 show a stronger instinct for using landmarks to navigate than for using verbal directions, hinting that spatial memory activates earlier and more naturally than language-based navigation ever does. Before you could describe a route in words, you were already built to remember it as a felt sense of place. So the next time your phone tells you to turn left in 400 feet, notice what's happening. You're not just following an instruction. You're opting out of one of the oldest and most sophisticated cognitive systems your species ever built, a system precise enough to guide a canoe across 2,000 miles of open ocean to a single small island. Using nothing but starlight, waves, and birds. You don't need a satellite to find your way home. You never did. You are standing in a parking lot. Your phone is dead. And somewhere underneath the panic, a much older part of you is already looking up, already reading the sky, already remembering the way.